These video diaries are, again, my effort to just be more spontaneous and come at creativity from just one more direction. And so I realized that I hadn't read the C.S. Lewis reading that I wanted to read for you, that I mentioned earlier in the day that I was going to read for you. But first I want to show you this fish. I'll bet you probably figured that out by now. This fish, you've probably also figured out, is a piece of metal. But I wonder how many of you have figured out, maybe you guys are all much smarter than me and aren't surprised to discover, but I was both surprised and delighted to discover that the color in this fish has not been applied, but rather the color has emerged. These patterns of color that distinguish this as a rainbow trout. I used to guide in the White River as well in Arkansas, and we didn't catch rainbow that big very often. That's a big rainbow trout. But these colors emerge from the metal when the right heat with a blowtorch is applied, and these colors emerge. And I just think that's marvelous. I just think that's so extraordinary. And so C.S. Lewis, you all know who C.S. Lewis is. C.S. Lewis was the man who wrote the Narnia Chronicles, or the Chronicles of Narnia, I guess it is. C.S. Lewis was also very good friends with Mr. Tolkien, the man who wrote The Hobbit, and who wrote The Hobbit and wrote Lord of the Rings. And when those books were first published, the English public was not really all that excited about it. It was, in fact, the English reading public and the critics very much dismissed these works because they were considered to be infantile, they were considered to be childish. Western logical mind reigned so supreme that this was considered to be incompatible with what was an adult taste for creativity. And so C.S. Lewis, who also happened to be a very good friend of Tolkien's, I think they were both I know they were both dons together. I forget whether it was Oxford or Cambridge. C.S. Lewis came to his rescue, or came to his defense, I guess, with an essay about the topic, and this is something that I read to my Duke students, and ever since I found it, and I like it. And here it is. If we are to use the words childish or infantile as terms of disapproval, then we must make sure that they refer only to those characteristics of childhood which we become happier and better by outgrowing, and not to those which every sane man would keep if he could, and which some are fortunate for keeping. Some men are fortunate for keeping. On the bodily level, this is sufficiently obvious. We are glad to have outgrown the muscular weakness of children, but we envy those who retain its energy. We envy those who retain its well-thatched scalp. Its well-thatched scalp. Receding hairline. It's easily one sleeps. I'll mention my insomnia to you before we go too much further. Oh, there I have. And its power of rapid recuperation. But surely the same is true on another level. If there's certain things about childhood that we envy on the physical level, that we admire, that we respect, that we would love to keep on the physical level, are there things that we should want to keep on another level? Now, the sooner we cease to be as fickle, as boastful, as jealous, as cruel, as ignorant, or as easily frightened, turning the page here, folks, as easily frightened as a child, the better. Here's the fish again. And it's not only the better for us, it's also the better for our neighbors. But who in his senses would not keep, if he could, and you can, if you decide you want to, that's my editorial comment, who in his senses would not keep, if he could, that tireless curiosity, that intensity of imagination, that facility for suspending disbelief, that's a very important one, the facility for suspending disbelief. I was speaking to the fellow who heads up the entrepreneur program at Fuqua, at Duke's MBA school, a couple of months back, and he said one of the toughest things for the more mature students who have spent years in corporate life, one of the toughest things for them to let go of if they want to be successful now in an entrepreneurial world, is that you can create a pretty successful career in the corporate world by just simply being the disbeliever, by being the naysayer, by being the person who shows that we ought not to do things that other people are proposing to do. But you sure can't be that person in the entrepreneurial world. And so, who in his senses would not keep, if he could, that tireless curiosity, that intensity of imagination, that facility of suspending disbelief, that unspoiled appetite, that readiness to wonder? Oh, they're all so good, and maybe that's my favorite. The readiness to wonder, and to pity, and to admire. And that's an important one. That's an important one. This isn't competitive. If we're going to rebuild this economy, if we're going to renew it, we all have to be working together to do this. So we have to admire each other and appreciate each other's work and really support each other. So the process of growing up is to be valued for what we gain and not for what we lose. So again, you can see, I hope you can see, I'm guessing if you're here, if you've made it this far, you are what you are, which is a creatively entrepreneurial student, and I'm confident that therefore Lewis's words are inspiring for you, and they're positive aspirational words that help us be more mindful of how we go about building our 10,000 hours of creative practice, of creative consideration, of creative contemplation.